Good morning or good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this webinar, WHODrug Koda, an overview including the latest updates and vendor experiences. My name is Daman Fahimi, and I am working as a product manager for WHODrug at the UMC, essentially making sure that WHODrug is meeting both regulatory and user needs. Originally, I was supposed to have a colleague of mine joining in during this session, but due to some unavoidable circumstances, we had to adjust our plans a bit. And therefore, you are stuck with me for today's session. Fortunately, during the second part of this session, we have asked our WHODrug Koda vendors to step in and provide some insights on their implementation of Coda. And today we'll be hearing from 4 of them during this webinar, namely Perficient, Prudentia, Clearwrite, and Eclipse. And of course, a big thanks to these guys who are willing to share their experiences with us. So here is the outline for today. I will start us off by talking about some of the basic features of WHODrug Koda before we'll talk about accessibility. By then, it's time to hear from the 4 vendors, as I just described, and I'll provide you with more specifications on how we're going to do that when we get there. And finally, I'll share some information on where WHODrug Koda is going in the future, before it's time for a question and answers session. So if you have any questions for us during today's session, please write them in the questions log within the control panel of the webinar system. And please note that the vendor presentations have been pre-recorded, but we will have some of them joining our Q&A session. So should you have any questions to any of the vendors, please be clear in addressing them specifically when you write and submit your questions. As you might have noted, you can also download the presentation slides from today's session from the handout part of the control panel. And you can also find the slides via the UMC website. But now it's high time to get started for real. And let's do so by taking it from the very beginning. So what is drug coding? And this is of course something that many of you are already very, very familiar with. But well, drug coding can be described as a process of structuring and making sense of unstructured drug data, all of course with the end purpose of making meaningful analysis and taking meaningful clinical decisions, for example based on use of CONMEDs or in post-marketing safety reports. And of course, WHODrug Global is an important part of the drug coding process, since this is where we can find the standardized drug information that we need to do our analysis based on drug usage. Furthermore, we can divide drug coding into 2 parts, namely drug name coding and ATC selection. The first step in the drug coding process is the drug name coding, the mapping of drug information to one single record in WHODrug Global, a standardized medication name. Step 2 in the drug coding process is the selection of ATC codes. And as some of you might know, the ATC classification is a way of grouping drugs depending on where in the body they act, their mechanism of action, and more. Some drugs in WHODrug Global actually have more than one ATC code assigned to them. And there are now actually recommendations from regulators stating that they'd like us to select the single most appropriate ATC code based on the intended use for these scenarios. So drug coding, that must be a quite simple task, right? Well, actually, drug coding can be quite challenging. First of all, drug coding requires highly trained staff, not only within the field of medical coding, but also when it comes to internal conventions and more. Moreover, the volumes of drug data is getting more and more, especially with the emergence of the real world data that we hear so much about these days. So to be able to make best use of the Coda data, of course, both coding quality and consistency is really, really important for us. Finally, we have come to understand that the available supportive tools and processes, such as, for example, synonym lists and existing autoencoders, do not always fulfill user needs and can take a lot of time to figure out, maintain, and in the case of synonym list, also version. So with all of this in mind, we at the UMC ask ourselves, could the UMC potentially do something to the users by developing a service optimized to get a better coding efficiency and consistency by making use of the latest technology and WHODrug know-how? And the answer to that question turned out to be yes, and the result, namely WHODrug Koda, was officially launched in March 2019. Coda feeds on raw data that is normally collected in both drug safety and clinical trials, namely drug verbatim, route, and indication information. What WHODrug Koda then spits out is both the coded drug names, but also one specific selected ATC code dependent on the information in the input data. Please note that coding can be performed even if indication and or route are missing, but of course the performance and accuracy are much higher if all three values are present, just as it would be for a manual coder. Coda presents the result for both the drug name coding and ATC selection on two confidence levels. So either Coda is really, really sure about the coding prediction, then the coding is performed with high certainty, or Coda is for some reason not as sure, and then the prediction is labeled as lower certainty. And this is a screenshot from the WHODrug Koda web application, which we will talk about more in just a few minutes. But basically, this slide shows you the same information as on the previous slide. That is, you have your input data on your left-hand side. And please note that none of the input data needs to be pre-coded, as Coda, for example, can handle, for example, spelling mistakes and extraneous information and more within all three fields. On your right-hand side, I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's stated coded. And on your right-hand side, you can find the output from Coda. That is, again, the coded drug names and selected ATC codes. And whenever WHODrug Koda is able to provide high certainty predictions, the output data has normal colors. But when WHODrug Koda is provided lower certainty predictions, they will be a yellowish background color, as seen in some of the examples, and that is applicable for both the drug name coding and ATC selection. So here we have an example of drug coding as performed by WHODrug Koda. we have a drug name, nafasolin nafcon 0.1% ophthalmic solution. So again, we see here that this data is absolutely not pre-coded or defined in any way. It contains a lot of information. In the route field, we have a route, and in the indication field, we have an indication. And if we were to run this through WHODrug Koda, we will see that WHODrug Koda will code it this way. It will code it to a specific trade name in WHODrug Global, NAVCON, with nafasolin hydrochloride as an active component. And furthermore, Coda has also been able to select a specific ATC code, in this case SO1GA, reflecting the ophthalmic use of NAVCON. So now you might wonder, how is WHODrug Koda able to perform drug coding at all? With WHODrug Koda, we are making use of the latest technology such as machine learning. And in the very beginning, we had an idea of that machine learning could be the solution to the entire drug coding dilemma. While in development, we quickly learned that it wasn't that easy. In fact, machine learning is only one of the important components within Coda. Another important piece in the puzzle of Coda has been applying coding rules derived from discussions with WHODrug users from all over the world. We have also applied several spelling checks and algorithms. And finally, WHODrug Koda also contains what we call dynamic coding rules that can be turned on or off depending on each user's organization's specific coding conventions or coding policies. So exactly how has machine learning been applied within WHODrug Koda? Well, we've used a variant called supervised machine learning and applying it mainly for the ATC selection part, although we use some parts of it also for the drug name coding. And to be successful with machine learning, you basically need to train your model to make high quality predictions. And in order to train your model, you of course need training data. And here we were actually very fortunate, and we could make use of Wikibase, a World Health Organization global database containing of ICSRs from all over the world that is actually hosted by us, the UMC. And within Wikibase, there are millions unique combinations of verbatim, route, and indication. And what's more, the drug data in Wikibase has already been coded by the coding team at UMC, which basically makes it a perfect training data set for us to use. So without going into too much specifics here, Wikibase has truly been a success factor for us with WHODrug Koda. So now just a few words on how WHODrug Koda is trained and updated. With a lot of the AI solutions that are out on the market right now, the users themselves are expected to do some kind of training to retrain and version the tool. So with WHODrug Koda, we've tried to take a lot of that away by saying that UMC will actually be the ones responsible for the training and the updates of the tool. So at the UMC, we have WHODrug expertise on many different levels. For example, we have a big team of pharmacists and medical experts that both maintain WHODrug Global on a daily basis, but also code data for Wikibase, which in itself, by the way, is helping us to retrain Coda as new data comes into Wikibase. We also have a research team with data scientists that are helping us with keeping the machine learning model that we have built into Coda up to date. And finally, we have developers that are experts in how we best can apply coding rules and algorithms and provide that in one package, so to speak. So what's the role of the industry then, the users of WHODrug Koda? Well, we envision that the role of the users is mainly to provide us at the UMC with feedback that can help us to form and develop Coda as we go along. And with this approach, we really hope that we'll together be able to form a really powerful tool that actually gets better and better as we go along. But now let's focus a bit on how well WHODrug Koda is doing the job today. So first of all, it's important to get that there aren't any absolute results. Of course, the results will be based on whatever data you feed WHODrug Koda with, and how many of the free input parameters that you have used and so on. But with that said, we have now done a number of test runs with more or less large amounts of data, and the results have been more or less consistent with the numbers I'm showing you within this presentation. So I feel pretty confident in showing you this slide. And we are going to start with the efficiency, that is the percentage of the terms that WHODrug Koda can actually code. So for the drug name coding, Coda confidently codes around 80% of all the data, with an additional 15% lower certainty codings, and 5% of the data remains uncoded. And if we then look at the ATC selection part, WHODrug Koda can successfully and confidently select ATC codes for around 80% of the coded drug names, with an additional 20% selected with lower certainty. And please note that Coda always provides at least one lower certainty ATC selection, as long as the indication information has been provided to Coda. But I think the maybe most relevant question, how well does WHODrug Koda perform the coding that it actually does? How often is WHODrug Koda right versus wrong? And again, we have, together with reference users, looked into the performance of Coda by comparing to data already coded by human coding teams. And we have seen conformance rates of 94 to 97% for both drug names and ATC coding. And when we have looked into the differences, we have seen that Coda actually makes mistakes just as often or even more rarely than human coding teams, which to me is very promising. But again, I think the most important thing here to remember is that we should compare apples to apples, and that brings us nicely to this slide. So if you'd like to try out WHODrug Koda for yourself and see how well does it perform on my clinical trial data or similar, we made it possible to access a trial application of the Coda web application via the UMC website, for example via the clickable link on this side. And of course, feel free to reach out to the UMC for more information, or if you need more test terms or similar, and we'd be happy to take those discussions with you from the UMC side. So how to access WHODrug Koda? The service is available as an add-on to an existing WHODrug Global subscription and is provided as both a web application and as an API service, which can be used within your existing coding tool or similar. And our vision at UMC is that the web application might be helpful for evaluations of WHODrug Koda features or coding medications and ATC classes in smaller studies. While of course, if you are planning to code large amounts of data, UMC recommends to make use of your conventional coding tool and applying WHODrug Koda within that via the WHODrug Koda API. I won't spend too much time talking about the license model for WHODrug Koda, but basically it's based on a pay-as-you-go model, where you pay a certain amount for each term submitted and coded by Coda. And if you want any further information, it's available on this slide, or you can contact the UMC team, and we can direct you to our subscription colleagues who are experts on this. We are working with all our vendors within the WHODrug vendor program, and so far the following vendors and related systems have announced compatibility with the Coda APIs. They are CRSCube, Eclipse, Proficient, Prudentia, and Clearwrite. And with that, it's now time for the second part of today's session. So during the following 25 minutes or so, we have offered all implementation providers and vendors that have implemented support for WHODrug Koda to share their experiences with the Coda implementation, to show you how Coda can look like within a coding tool or similar. 4 vendors did accept our offer, and today we will therefore hear from Proficient, Prudentia, Clearwrite, and Eclipse, respectively. So again, thanks to these organizations for being with us today. And each of these 4 vendors have shared with UMC a short video presentation, pre-recorded again. And these videos are presented following the order in which they were submitted to the UMC. So with that, I think we are ready for our first vendor experience, and that will be Proficient. So Proficient provides technology and consulting services to organizations in the pharmaceutical area, and we will now hear from Christoph Breeden that will share Proficient experience with Coda implementation. So in just a few seconds, we will have Christoph's presentation with us, hopefully, if the technology works. And here it is.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Christoph Breeden. I work as a senior solutions architect for a company called Proficient. I have 25 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, with one focus being in the area of medical coding, coding systems, and coding dictionaries, including WHODrug. Today, I would like to give you a short presentation on how you could integrate WHODrug Koda into your coding process via its web service API. As you know, Coda can help you to do your daily drug coding business, but it can also help to upgrade your WHODD version or even your WHODD format. One way to use it is via uploading and downloading data through the Coda UI, but it is also possible to fully integrate it into your systems by using the Coda Web Service API. Now, using web service APIs is not always straightforward, as you have to deal with technicalities like transforming data, generating network traffic, security certificates, etc. Thus, it would simplify integration if you had an additional interface level available, which hides all the technical bits. A group of our company Proficient has built a prototype of such an interface, and this is what I would like to talk about today. I will give an overview of the design, usage, and possible integrations. And I will give also some information at the end of the slide deck how to find out more if you're interested. In order to build such an interface, we needed first to decide for a platform, and we have chosen Oracle. This choice was kind of arbitrary, but of course you could build a similar interface on any other platform. This prototype consists basically of a table which contains the drug data to be coded and mimics the source application, plus some programming objects which interact with the web service API right out of the database. The only system requirement is that you have Oracle version 12 or higher, and you need to have the UMC certificates installed and an open network connection from your database to the UMC server. No further infrastructure is required. Here you can see the designed workflow. The source system or application puts the drugs to be coded into a table and then triggers the interface. The interface converts the data into the format expected by the Coda application, calls the Coda Web Service API, gets back the response from Coda with coding information, and then passes the response and updates the drug data with the coding information in the source system. Triggering the interface could of course be an automated process, for example, a regular batch job, or automated execution if the table of drugs has been updated. This design now actually hides all the technical complicated bits from the end user or end application. Let's have a look to a real example. Here you can see what the drug data table looks like initially. The columns with blue heading are reflecting the data which is exchanged with Coda. Initially, we have drug verbatims, some of them with root and or indication. Now we trigger the interface. And this is now the part actually nobody really wants to deal with, which is to transform the data into Coda format, build the network connection, get the response back from Coda in Coda format, then pass the response and put the coding information back into their source table. And this is what the table then looks like after the interface execution. The interface has updated the code and ATC code column with some values. Please note that here you can only see the encoded information. The comment column shows some information on suggested drugs if available. Let's have a look into a few lines. So the first line is paracetamol, which is correctly coded to its drug code and ATC code, although no indication was provided. This is because paracetamol has only one ATC code. Lines 2 to 6 are some records with aspirin, which has 4 ATC codes from 4 different classes, which are fairly distinctive. And for properly spelled indications, the drug code and ATC code was always correct. Only for the misspelled indication in line 4, the ATC code was incorrect. Lines 7 to 11 are some examples where we have tried non-unique drugs, non-existing names, umbrella terms, drugs with multiple ATC codes from the same class, etc. All codes which were provided were as expected and correct. Suggested information was also as expected and correct. Of special interest are the lines 12 to 14, which is an example on how you could use Coda for a version of format upgrade. The trade name Sepcur was non-unique in a previous version and became unique in a more recent version, and Coda is able to correctly encode or suggest the code from the current version if you pass in the trade name with ingredients attached as it was stored in the previous version. Now, such an Oracle-based interface could be potentially integrated with any Oracle-based system. For example, Argo Safety, where you could use it for coding during case entry or for coding during case save. Or you could integrate it with Oracle TMS, where you could, for example, auto-create non-approved VTAs for coding omissions, which is sent to Coda and where Coda returns a code. As already said, this prototype is currently Oracle-based, but could be explored for other platforms as well. Thank you for your attention. Here you can find some general information on Proficient, on our team, which was involved in developing this prototype, and also some further email and phone contact information. You can also hear more about this or talk to us in person at the upcoming ACDM conference, WHODrug user group meeting, and Oracle Health Science Connect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christoph, for this little talk. And we will move on straight away. As I said, we have 4 vendor presentations today, pre-recorded ones. And we will move on to Prudentia. Prudentia is the provider of MedCoder, and Puneet, who leads and manages the MedCoder product at Prudentia, will now tell us more about WHODrug Koda implementation in MedCoder. So again, let's hope for the best and see if we can get the video up and running.
Hello, everyone. My name is Puneet, and I manage the MedCoder product at Prudentia. Before working for Prudential, I was working for Cerner, where I was the product lead for DS Navigator. You can use Metcoder to code with Coda, and today we will see how you can use Metcoder to do that. Once a verbatim is sent to Coda for coding, it can either return a term or it can return a list of terms as suggestions. So we will also see how you can use Metcoder to handle the suggestions. We will then see some of the Metcoder enhancements or functionalities on top of Coda. In Metcoder, you have a list of verbatim to code. From the list, you first identify the verbatim that need to be sent to Coda for coding. This can be done in multiple ways. You can set a filter using various conditions on the list of verbatim and send the entire filtered list to Coda. Or you can select one or more terms manually and send the selected terms to Coda. Here, I have manually selected 9 terms to be sent to Coda for coding. Notice that a duplicate verbatim vermifuge exists, which I have not selected, and I will talk to you about it soon. Once I have made the selection, I click on a button to send the terms to Coda. You can see the options. My options are all verbatim, 10 in this case. Currently selected verbatim, which is 9, as I did not select a duplicate vermifuge. Currently filtered verbatim, which is set to 0 because I have not set any filter. Had I applied some filter, a number would come up here to indicate how many terms are being sent to Coda. All unassigned verbatim, which is 10, nothing has been assigned as of now. And all assigned verbatim as well, which is 0, but the option is there in case I want to recode. In this particular case, I'm going to choose currently selected verbatim. Coda also accepts 2 other parameters, use preferred base rule and use generic rule, which can be turned on or off in Metcoder. In this case, I'm asking Coda to use both the rules. So I've turned them on in Metcoder. Coding with Coda in Metcoder is an asynchronous process, which means it is a background process. Once started, it will run in the background, and you can continue working in other areas of Metcoder or even log out and log back in at a later time. There is an option at the bottom to notify you once the coding with Coda has completed, the send mail on completion checkbox. As of now, Coda is very fast, which is very good. But in case if you have hundreds of thousands of verbatim to be coded, you can run this process in Metcoder in the background. Once you click OK, the terms, along with the route of administration and indication if present, also with the rule options that you have set, will be sent to Coda for coding. After the coding with Coda is complete, you can return to Metcoder's verbatim list to review the assignments. You will see that some verbatim were coded with Coda, where Coda has made a suggestions, whereas Coda has made a suggestions for others. Coda returns something called coding path, which basically tells how Coda arrived at the decision. Metcoder captures that and displays it to you. Notice that avastatin was coded with coding path of direct hit. Notice also that amoxicillin was coded with a coding path of non-unique by generic rule. Notice that for vermifuge, even though coding path is direct hit, which means Coda has found a match, in Metcoder its status is Coda suggests. I will talk to you about it in a short while. Within Metcoder, the status of a verbatim related to Coda coding are Coda encoded, which means that given the verbatim route and indication is available and the rule options, Coda was able to find a match. Coda suggests, which means that given the information, Coda was not able to find a match but has made a suggestion, one or more suggestions. And you need to review those suggestions and see how you want to code. Pick one of those suggestions or code differently. Coda manually coded status means that your manual coding decision was based on the suggestions made by Coda. It means that you picked one of the suggestions that was made by Coda. As mentioned before, Metcoder displays the coding path returned by Coda. Notice that in Metcoder, the status of vermifuge was Coda suggests, while coding path was direct hit. And we will talk about it soon. When Coda has made a suggestion, you need to review the suggestions. In order to do that, select the verbatim for which you want to review and click on the Review Suggestion button. You will see a list of all the suggestions made by Coda for the selected verbatim. You can also see a complete list of all suggestions made by Coda, not only for this coding run, but from the past as well. That option is also possible in MetCoder. In this case, I want to see the suggestions for aspirin. So I click aspirin and click on the button to view suggestions. I see that Coda made 4 suggestions. At the far right, I have the option to either approve any one of the suggestions or rejecting the suggestions. Once I approve any one of the suggestions, all others are automatically rejected by MetCoder. When you approve a suggestion by clicking on the thumbs up in the action column on the far right, the verbatim is coded to that suggestion. Now let's talk about the direct hit and Coda suggests. When I review the suggestions for vermifuge, I see that the preferred term of vermifuge has 2 ATC classifications. Even though Coda picked the term vermifuge, since there are more than 1 ATC classifications possible for this preferred, MetCoder kept it in the suggestions list, so you can select the correct classification for this term. In MetCoder, there is a functionality of propagating the assignment, which can be turned on or off. In this example, vermifuge was duplicate, and I sent only one of them to Coda for coding. When I approve one of the suggestions for vermifuge, the coding assignment is propagated to the other duplicate vermifuge. This is because my setting was to propagate the coding assignment. MetCoder looks at route and indication, if present, to propagate the assignment. So for example, coding for aspirin with indication of blood clot will not propagate to other aspirin if it was present where the indication was pain. So not just the drug name, but the name of the drug as well as route indication together are compared before the assignment is propagated from one to other. MetCoder has also a extra functionality called term usage policy. In MetCoder, you can configure term usage policies, and there are several different options. One of them is requires review. So if you have configured a policy of requires review to the drug, for example, let's say salbutamol, whenever Coda codes or make a suggestions to salbutamol, MetCoder will require you to review that coding, as you can see in the policy column here on the far right. So if for some reason you believe that Coda is for any reason returning questionable results for few drugs, you can set the requires review policy on those in MetCoder and then review the coding assignment after the coding has been done using Coda. These are all the different ways you can use MetCoder to work with Coda, to code with Coda, to review the suggestions, and on top of that, if you have any kind of extra step that you want to do on top of codes written by Coda, you can perform those as well. You can contact us. You can reach me at my email address or my phone number as displayed here, or the easiest way is to search for us on Google on the term MetCoder, MEDCODR, and from the search result, you can go to our web page and contact us from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Punit. And with that, we say thank you to Punit and Prudentia. And we will jump into the next vendor presentation. I just wanted to remind you that if you have any specific questions to any of the coding tool providers, please write the vendor name and what question you have, and we can see if we have time to direct 1 or 2 questions at least in the end of this presentation, depending on how much time we have. I also see that we have 1 or 2 comments about people who cannot hear the video audio, and it seems like the webinar tool is dividing the audio, so please make sure that you have selected the correct output for your laptop. You should be able to hear the audio. Now we jump into the next vendor small talk, and this is ClearWrite. And we will be hearing from Prashant Shakai, Associate Director at ClearWrite, and he will tell us more about PACE, their flagship software product, and their plans regarding Coda implementation. So in just a second or two, ClearWrite.
Hi, everyone. My name is Prashant Shakai. I'm the Associate Director of Customer Services here at ClearWrite. Let me start by thanking UMC for inviting me to be a part of this webinar to share the exciting news of upcoming PACE WHODrug Koda integration with the WHODrug user community. I also thank all the participants for this webinar for taking the time to participate today. As my subtitle in the slide indicates, we believe that PACE and WHODrug Koda combination can bring about many additional benefits to both PACE and WHODrug users. My colleagues from UMC have already spoken about WHODrug Koda. I will briefly introduce ClearWrite's coding solution called PACE to those of you that may not have been aware of ClearWrite and the PACE offering. To introduce PACE, as indicated here, PACE is a dictionary-neutral coding system with support for multilingual capabilities as well. To add a word about multi-dictionary capabilities, PACE support extends beyond MEDRA and WHODrug dictionaries, and that we are able to support sponsor custom dictionaries and also dictionaries from healthcare domain when situations demand. PACE multilingual capability means that coding can be natively supported in any language for which dictionaries are available. For example, coding natively in German with MEDRA or Chinese with WHODrug Global. Also, the source agnostic mentioned in the slide refers to the PACE ability to be used as a standalone or integrated with any EDC or CDM solution in the market. Having introduced to the PACE product, I will spend a few moments to talk about ClearWrite's history with PACE product and our market position. PACE has initially been introduced as an internal coding engine in 2004 and has been continuously used. Since 2013, PACE has been available as a standalone SaaS offering, and ClearWrite is supporting hundreds of clinical trials. PACE user base is spread across the world. We at ClearWrite offer support to the users on a 24/7, 365 basis across all time zones. Now to the subject of PACE and WHODrug Koda integration. We at ClearWrite believe that integrating PACE with Coda fits the PACE product's remit very much, as we and UMC product to partner to bring together the advantages of both offerings for the benefit of user community. As indicated, PACE benefits stem from multi-dictionary adaptability, operational flexibility, uniform workflows across dictionaries, flexible synonym management, and highly developed dictionary option capabilities. To sum up this brief presentation, ClearWrite is excited to partner with UMC and integrate PACE with WHODrug Koda as a way to make Coda features accessible to PACE and Coda users. Easily and extend the PACE dictionary management and data synchronization capabilities across studies or databases to Coda. I thank you again for your time. As this presentation has been intentionally kept brief to appropriately share the time with all the presenters, I am sharing ClearWrite's contact details as shown in case of any questions outside of this webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Prashant. And last but not least, we will have Eclipse sharing their experiences with WHODrug Koda. And that will be done by Leslie Bihari, who is the President and CEO at Eclipse. So I hope that you're all still awake and that you will enjoy this last vendor small talk before we kind of round off and talk about the future of Coda, as well as head into the question and answers session. But first, here is Leslie and Eclipse.
Good morning. My name is Les Bihari, and I'm the owner of Eclipse Clinical Technology. I'd like to take this time to thank everyone for the opportunity to share with you how our system interacts with the Coda offering from UMC. Eclipse allows you to integrate with Coda, but maintain granular control. First, with determining which fields you're going to actually send to Coda. This includes any combination of drug, indication, or route. Secondly, we let you determine how to manage the ATC results that come back from Coda. So if you currently are not coding ATC, you don't need to do so in order to be able to take advantage of Coda. Thirdly, we allow you to determine when to involve Coda in the process. If you'd like to code against your synonyms list first, you can feel free to do so. Finally, we allow you whether to restrict each record to a single submission to Coda or to allow for multiple submissions to Coda to capture any updates. So from our perspective, the Coda process begins with a data import, obviously. And once that's in, we'll determine whether or not to send it directly to Coda or to run it against the synonym and dictionaries. Any matches that will be found from that process will be marked as coding complete. Anything that is left uncoded will be sent to Coda. If there are any matching results from Coda, those will be marked complete, and you'll be then be able to manually code anything that is uncoded. You have an additional option to be able to send uncoded values into Coda again, but that is completely up to you on whether or not to configure the system in that regard. And the process continues until coding is complete. So let's take a look at what this looks like inside of the system. When we come into Eclipse coding, we see a number of objects on the left-hand side. These are what we determine as coding sets. A coding set is just a group of terms that are going to be coded according to workflow, a common workflow. In this case, we've set up two coding sets for this demo, a deferred coding set and an immediate coding set. If we take a look at the terms that are associated in each one of them, we see that we're starting with exactly the same terms. They're just going to be handled a little bit differently. Now, normally on import, the autocoder is actually run. It can also be run at a certain time or interval. But in this case, I've stopped the autocoding process so that I can show you how we interact with Coda in slow motion. So at this time, I'm going to manually autocode both the deferred and the immediate workflow for the coding sets. Now, coming back to the deferred workflow, we see that all of our terms have been handled by the autocoder. Because we're doing the dictionary first, we see that EpiPen has been handled, but since it has multiple ATC codes, we're going to actually have to select one of these in order to continue, while with acetaminophen, we've coded both the ATC and the drug because there's only one ATC code available. Now, for the terms that have been uncoded at this point, we haven't sent anything to Coda yet. And the reason is we've designed this so that we can have a manual intervention to take a look at something like this, where we have acetylsalicylic acid just missing one character. We may want to take a chance at whether or not we can manually code this. So our fuzzy logic actually pulls up with 91% certainty acetylsalicylic acid 2701001. On a micro level, we can take a look at whether or not Coda would actually code this particular term. We see that it does find something, and it is indeed the term that our fuzzy logic has actually pulled up. Now, what we can do is we can actually code at this particular point, but I'm going to come back to the autocoder, and I'm going to let Coda do the work. So this time, I'm only going to run autocoder on the deferred mechanism. And if we take a look at what the autocoder is actually doing, we can take a look at the algorithm that we're using. In this case, we run against the dictionary first, and that's why we saw both EpiPen and acetaminophen coded the way they were. Ultimately, we also take a look at the results that come from Coda. Because we've started this with a D, and I want to call your attention to the fact that it starts with a D, it sends the terms to this intermediary workflow step so that we can actually perform manual intervention like we saw with acetylsalicylic acid. Now, at any point, we can change the order that this is done, so we can send it to Coda first, and we can send it to the dictionary, although we might not want to do that because Coda would know the dictionary, so maybe we want to send it to our synonym list after. But let's take a look at our terms now. They've been reduced and managed by Coda. If we come to Coda ATC, not only do we see EpiPen, but we see Avastin and ibuprofen. Now, from ibuprofen's perspective, there's multiple ATC codes, but it would be nice if we could have Coda actually help and make recommendations with regards to ATC codes as well. Indeed, we can. Coda returns the fact that there are two suggestions that they have for it, both with the same drug code, but you'll see that they recommend and we provide check marks next to a ATC code here and a different one, M02AA. So let's take the second one, and we can actually code ibuprofen at this particular step. We'll see that it joins our other records with acetaminophen here, which was coded to the dictionary. We've already seen that. And all of our other terms have been coded with the Coda application from UMC. If we take a look at our immediate workflow, we'll see that our codes have also been reduced. Once again, sending ibuprofen in with EpiPen for ATC coding and sending acetaminophen to the final step along with the other terms that have been run against Coda on a single auto-coding step. Now, Coda wouldn't be useful if we can't manage how it actually works. So we provide some reports in order to be able to do that. We give you some granularity with regards to the total number of terms that have been sent to Coda and a breakdown both tabularly and graphically with regards to the outcome of that coding process. In addition, we can give you further detail at the verbatim level and broken down by coding set so we can see exactly how each term is actually addressed. So I hope that I've shown you that Eclipse coding can optimize the value that Coda brings to your coding process by allowing you to decide how to handle the terms on both a macro and a micro level to manage the consumption and cost with using Coda. We give you inline flexibility with ATC coding, and we give you the management reports to monitor the Coda utility. If you'd like more information with this, please feel free to contact me at either this email or this telephone number. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Les. So with that, we have finished our small vendor small talks. And before we head into the Q&A session, I would just like to spend a few minutes talking about the future of WHODrug Koda. So as I said previously, the UMC is taking on the responsibility for updating and retraining WHODrug Koda for each and every release of WHODrug Global to ensure that Coda will remain a very powerful tool. And again, this is nothing that you, the users, has to do. This is something that we, the UMC, is taking on. We will also, based on whatever feedback you, the users of WHODrug Koda, give us, make sure that we pinpoint issues in WHODrug Koda if there is something that WHODrug Koda could perform better. And actually, we are already working on some of these based on, again, user feedback. Something that we would also like to do in the very near future actually is to investigate how WHODrug Koda could perform even more intelligent checks on exact matches, specifically to better catch and flag incorrect exact matches. So just because it happens to match with a term in WHODrug doesn't really mean that it's the correct way to code, so to speak. Could WHODrug Koda do that more intelligent? We'd also like to respond to user requests adding more dynamic, that is organization-specific coding rules that you can turn on and off depending on your use case. And finally, we're also exploring if and how to optimize WHODrug Koda to review and upversion already coded data. As we have seen from feedback that this is something that some of you would like to use WHODrug Koda or are using WHODrug Koda for. Is there a need to do something extra to answer to this need? So that was just a few words on how we will keep working with WHODrug Koda, which we of course will do in many ways. Now we have around 5 minutes left for question and answers. And I think that we'll start off with some general questions about WHODrug Koda that we have received. And if you want to ask us questions, you know where to do that. You just write in the questions log in the control panel of the webinar system. And if you have any questions directed to our vendors, please include them in the question, their name in the question as well, so we know who to direct the question to. We have one question here regarding the very basic concept. So what is the verbatim I was talking about in the input data? And the verbatim is actually the raw drug name data. That is what the patient says that he or she has been taking. That's the verbatim. Thanks for your question. We have a question regarding the ATC output when it comes to ATC selection. Does WHODrug Koda perform ATC selection on level 4 or level 5? And the answer there is on level 4 per the standard WHODrug files. With that said, it is actually possible to connect the output from WHODrug Koda to the cross-reference ATC level 5 file, which will give you a mapping to an ATC level 5. So it is possible, but it's currently not within the Coda web application or API. We also have one or two questions here regarding specific coding tools. Any experiences with coding tool X or ETC tool Y? And I think that I will answer very generically here. So we have reached out to all WHODrug vendors within our vendor program and given them the opportunity to work with us and implement WHODrug Koda. And we are providing implementation support, and API documentation and so more and so on. So far, we have the 5 vendors that I showed you on the list previously that have signed the agreement for Coda and implemented Coda within their tools. If you have questions regarding specific tools, I propose that you direct those directly to your vendor. Alternatively, you can of course contact us as well, and we can have an offline discussions about that. We have a question here about how to confirm the single ATC selected by Coda is correct if the route and indication is not available. Going back to the core functionality of Coda, please remember that WHODrug Koda does in principle only select ATC codes if we have the indication information, as this in most of the cases is essential information to make an ATC selection. We also have a question here, is this webinar recorded and can we get a copy? Yes, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent to you in a follow-up email, and it will also be available on the UMC website along with the presentation slides. One last question for the UMC, I think. What is a dynamic coding rule for an example? That's a good question. So a dynamic coding rule have we defined as a coding rule that is not generic. That is, some organizations might want to turn it on and some organizations might want to turn it off. So on a very, very high level, we have one of these dynamic coding rules saying that, is it okay for you to go to a base when there is salt differences between 2 different proposals? Can Coda then select the common base? We also have another question for us. If we do not want to use the most recent version of WHODrug Global, can we use WHODrug Koda with old versions? Yes, that is possible. That is, of course, possible. Good question. And the last question for us then. Did you say that the API always return at least one ATC code if an indication is given? Yes. If you will provide WHODrug Koda with the drug verbatim and at least indication information, WHODrug Koda will return ATC proposals at least. That is absolutely correct. We have one question here actually for Prudentia and Perficient. So let's see if we can get the technology to work, and I can maybe start to direct this question to Perficient if we have Christoph with us. The question is, do you have a manual human review process for comments that Coda has auto-coded? Christoph, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I think our position is maybe a little bit different that from Prudentia, because we have so far only done a prototype to come up with an Oracle-based API to Coda. So we have not yet integrated it into a coding system. So what that Oracle-based API returns is basically what Coda encodes or suggests. So it then depends on what the coding system you would connect to that API offers as solution.
Thank you very much, Christoph. And Alok, would you like to comment on this as well? You are now unmuted.
So yes, Prudential's Metcoder offer the option to manually review the process. Puneet has shown this from slide 7 onwards in this presentation also. So you can go through the slides again and you can see that there is a review process. You can review manually.
Thank you,
You can
Alok.
you can review manually after Coda coding.
Thank you, Alok. Finally, we have one question for Eclipse. So let's see if we can have Les with us here. Is there any meaning of submit again process? If the submitted verbatim is unchanged, expected result is considered as same. Did you get that question, Les? Now you're able to address that. So Les, I think you are self-muted, so you will need to turn off the mute if you want to address that question.
Yes, there's two ways that we can actually bypass the submit again. I mean, first of all, you don't have to configure the system to submit again. But there's two ways that you can actually, if that is the configuration that is set up, you can either manually code, and then that would take it out of consideration to submit again to Coda, or you can move it along in the workflow step so that it is not in the send to Coda workflow step. Either one of those would actually prevent it from going back to Coda a second time.
Thank you, Les, for that clear clarification. So I see that we are actually running out of time. So again, thank you very much to all our vendors that have participated today. We didn't have a question for Clearwrite, but maybe that's because Prashant's presentation was crystal clear. We will run this session again this afternoon, Swedish time at 5 p.m. Swedish time again. So if you would like to tune in, you're more than welcome. And as I said, the recording will be available as well. I would also really encourage you to fill out the webinar survey. So please let us know if there was something that you did like or something that you did not like during this session. And we'll take that into account when we are planning for our next sessions. So again, a big thank you to all of you for attending, and please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you and goodbye.